Hello, everyone, and welcome to the VIDA podcast, where we help educate military veterans and their spouses on career opportunities in Web3. Our plan is to host a series of industry leaders, many of whom are veterans or spouses themselves, so we can learn about their journey down the crypto rabbit hole while understanding opportunities for transitioning veterans in the industry. My name is Chris Perkins. I'm president of CoinFund. I'm a combat Marine vet who spent 15 years on Wall Street before transitioning into the crypto space. And before we begin, I really wanted to thank our sponsor, Luca, who have dedicated their time and resources to make this podcast possible. Today, we'll be speaking with somebody very special, an Army veteran and Purple Heart recipient, Jonathan Allen. Welcome, John.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on today. So, John, let's get started. Where did you grow up and why did you join the military?
Yeah, grew up in Sacramento, California, born and raised, and joined the military for a couple reasons. I mean, one of the main reasons was definitely to pay for college. That was definitely kind of like one of the attractive aspects, but it was really just kind of like serve my country, but the college piece was definitely a huge incentive for me.
Got it. And so what did you do in the military? Can you tell us about your service?
Yeah, so I did 5 years in the Army. I did explosive ordnance disposal. And so, yeah, it was one of those things where didn't really know much about a lot of the jobs. Like I was one of the first people in my family to join the military. So I went and took the ASVAB, scored quite well and had kind of like my pick of the litter. And they started kind of describing the different kind of jobs that you could take. And it was like, special forces, EOD. And they told me that, EOD school was on a beach in Florida and you get to blow stuff up. And it was like really compelling. And so I ended up going with that without really knowing a lot about it. But ended up getting into it and just absolutely loving it. It was just really challenging, had like an 80% fail out rate and didn't expect to be necessarily kind of as mentally challenged in that job as I ended up being.
Got it. And so I imagine you're used to bombs going off, particularly within your current job, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like the motto is like initial success or total failure. And I think there's like a lot of parallels kind of with crypto because normal kind of web development, you get to kind of move fast, kind of break stuff and iterate. But very much not for kind of blockchain and also not for disarming bombs. You only get kind of like one opportunity for that.
So you were deployed in combat, right?
Yeah, correct. I deployed to Afghanistan.
Are you comfortable speaking about it?
Yeah, for sure.
So what was that like?
It was interesting. For the first 3 months, we were with kind of like Aussies, and it was pretty mellow, pretty low key. And then we ended up replacing a unit that was much further south. So I ended up going to the Horn of Panjwai, which was definitely a hot area. We were kind of like bored the first 3 months, just working out a lot and kind of hanging out, and then got very, very busy. So went from kind of like a more formalized kind of a base to just kind of like an outpost. So it was like probably 150 people, kind of tents, HESCO barriers, and went out pretty much every day, like found IEDs every day, gotten kind of like ticks like almost every day, and so yeah, it was definitely kind of what we had trained for. So kept things quite interesting.
Got it. And you were wounded, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a rough deployment, honestly. So I was on a team of 3. Like EOD normally kind of works with teams of 3, and then you kind of get delegated out to different units. And so all 3 of the people on my team ended up getting injured in kind of separate incidents, and so I was the second. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. So tell us about your transition. I guess you were wounded and then you transitioned out. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. Ended up getting medevaced, had like 13 surgeries, was in the hospital like a month, and then had about a year where I was kind of transitioning out, going through like physical therapy, occupational therapy. So definitely not necessarily the transition I had expected. I was kind of 50-50 on re-upping. Like I was actually kind of, my contract was, I kind of was trying to make the decision during that deployment. The bonus was like quite large, like retention bonus, and then also I would get my pick of duty stations. So I was like probably going to be like stationed in Hawaii, and a lot of incentive to stay in. So I was kind of like, do I want to get out and actually go to college and go to law school like I had planned to, or kind of stay in? But getting injured really kind of like forced that issue, and I had to figure out pretty quick what I wanted to do.
Wow, how many? You said you had 13 surgeries, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh my God! And so you were laid up for like a year, and was that when you started learning about crypto?
Yeah, it was one of those things like I was just kind of sitting around, like would have like one OT appointment a day or one PT appointment a day, and then just didn't really have much else to do. Like a lot of times I would just kind of be staying like in my room, just kind of hanging out because it's not like I was like expected to do a lot of stuff kind of in that interim period. And so had a lot of time on my hands, just kind of, I've always been super passionate about kind of tech, political science, like macroeconomics. I always like enjoyed reading. And I just happened to come upon the Bitcoin white paper, and, kind of encapsulated in that 9 pages was just like all of these, the intersection of all of these interests. And so just totally went down the rabbit hole, would spend like all day on Bitcoin Talk, on like Reddit Bitcoin, like being on Whale Call TeamSpeak, like just trying to kind of like get any data points that I really could to try to learn more about the space.
Wow. So there you are, recovering, going through physical therapy after 13 surgeries. You start reading about crypto. And I imagine the amount of information out there this is like, what, 2013 or so?
Yeah, 2013.
So back in 2013, I imagine there wasn't the depth of information and research that we see today. What was the quality? Can you tell us? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I always tell people, like back then it was like, I had like pretty much every keyword for Bitcoin of the day. I would just try to like read anytime somebody like mentioned it, and just kind of like scrape like any page that I could find. And probably took me like an hour to 2 a day, which looking back now, I mean, if you're interested in crypto, like you could read 24/7, and there's probably like more, significantly more content than when you started. So it was a little bit slow, trying to find meetups or trying to find people to talk to or trying to find groups. It was quite sparse. And, I was kind of like consistently over the next like 2-3 years, like always that person posting on Facebook, or trying to get people excited about it, and like always talking to my friends about it. And they were like, cool, this magic internet money, you're going to like lose all of your money. But it was definitely not as prevalent as today, where, you're seeing it kind of all over TV, and crypto companies sponsor and do commercials. And it's really just kind of everywhere, especially compared to back then.
Well, now we actually do have managing internet money, or MIM, the MIM token.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're reading everything that's out there in 2013. You go through your year of rehabilitation. What happens next?
Yeah. So, I mean, ended up moving back. I was at JBLM, like up in Washington, Fort Lewis, and ended up moving back home to Sacramento. Was just kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because didn't really kind of get that transition period to kind of figure things out. And I realized I just really wanted to go back to school. So still kept being kind of like very passionate about crypto. I ended up actually getting like super into Casasious coins and like physical crypto. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's kind of like a side interest for me. I just thought it was kind of like a beautiful representation of like this physical to digital money kind of encapsulated in one piece. So got pretty into that. Started trying to go to more kind of like Bitcoin meetups and things of that nature. And then I ended up getting into UC Berkeley. So that was kind of the next step. I was like going to college, which is kind of my original plan before I joined the military, which was great.
And tell us about your college experience, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, it was fantastic, because it was like, I'd always wanted to go to Berkeley. It was more for like the law school aspect of it. But then, getting there, I decided, I think like, business and just kind of like starting my own company was something that I was a bit more passionate about. About 6 months before that, I had worked for like a small tech startup and really just kind of caught that entrepreneurial bug. Like, my mom did daycare, my dad drove a forklift. Like, I never really knew it was possible, to just start your own company and come up with an idea and get funding. And so I was just like, wow, this is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I ended up starting at UC Berkeley, and there was a Bitcoin association there that had been started for a year or two, and there was like a decal that was made by Max Fang and Philip Hayes and a couple other folks there. And the Bitcoin meetup was just very casual, right? It was just people hanging out and talking about crypto, just kind of like all the other meetups. But then, they ended up kind of planning, it was like start a blockchain club. And so I was going to basically end up applying there. But my friend Ronan, I met him in a statistics class because he was reading a CoinDesk article. I think it was CoinDesk. It was like a crypto site in one of our stats class, and I like looked over his shoulder and like stalked him down after class, and he's like, "Why are you looking at my?" He's like this Israeli kind of like IDF guy, and he's like, "Why are you looking at my laptop?" And then I was like, "Hey, I'm super passionate about crypto," and then we ended up becoming quite close, and it was cool because then this blockchain at Berkeley initiative ended up getting started, and I just got obsessed with that. It was a great group of peers. People were super motivated. It started out as a student org, but then we started talking with people like Airbus and Qualcomm and BMW, and we thought we would just do these small research projects, but we ended up building like blockchain products, and kind of like proof of concepts, and winning bids against some of these larger kind of consultancies because they were still very much in the fact-finding phase, where as we were deep into it, we wanted to build it, and our timeline was like, hey, we want to get this done in a semester, as opposed to kind of billing $1,000 an hour and figure it out next year kind of thing. So really enjoyed that. But it was a good experience, but realized they're slow to move. They're not actually going to use this in production. There's a lot of legal hurdles for kind of those large companies. So then I ended up working with more startups, which was timely because that was kind of beginning of 2017. And then, about 6-ish months later, like the ICO boom kicked off. So I was working with kind of like 2 different teams to help with different ICOs. So probably worked with around 30 different ICOs doing like smart contract auditing, white paper writing, token economics. And that's really kind of where I got like deeply involved in kind of more entrepreneurial application of blockchain stuff, which was great.
Wow. I imagine that original Berkeley community was pretty powerful. And I bet you a bunch of those folks went on to do big things in the crypto space.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think like it just really kind of changed the trajectory of my life because like, I like being with people who are so passionate and so motivated and so knowledgeable and like going from trying to scrape the web to try to figure stuff out to having these like in-depth discussions, and like white paper circles where people are like deep diving and like networking and being able to share that info with people who are like equally as passionate, if not more than me. It was absolutely wild. And yeah, there's been a ton of projects that have come out of Berkeley from kind of my peers and from kind of groups after the fact, which has been fantastic.
Got it. And so, at that point in your career, it's the ICO boom. You're there helping various projects with auditing, smart contract auditing, et cetera. Did you just ride the boom up and then ride it back down, or how did your career map out as a next step? I
had been pretty kind of like actively investing, like personally, and then in doing a lot of these kind of like very hands-on kind of work like with a lot of these teams. We ended up getting like kind of 6-7 figure token allocations, like for that team. And we were like, okay, we're just like this ad hoc student group, like doing work, like should probably formalize this into a fund. So me and 2 partners, kind of winter break of our senior year, we ended up flying around to 6 countries, raised $25 million, started Decrypt Capital. Because like at that time, there was just a lot of fluff, right? There was like a lot of things that we just thought weren't fundamentally interesting or correct. And we thought there was a real lack of kind of very technical funds. So we thought it was quite differentiated. Once again, I had no idea that you could just go raise a hedge fund and like invest. And so like it was a fantastic learning experience. All of us were pretty young on the team, but we really had domain expertise because this was a very, very kind of nascent, like new technology. So started the fund February 2018, being like a long only venture style kind of fund, which looking back was probably terrible timing, but was a fantastic learning experience because it was one of those things about like kind of the investment time horizon, and almost all the projects we invested in, we kind of like drew this dichotomy between like missionary versus mercenary. There were a lot of mercenaries back then that just wanted to flip tokens, and this is like, they're like, this is decentralized Airbnb or decentralized, not to knock anyway, because I know there's some other iterations now, but it's like, they just want to decentralize it and have a token, and it just really had like no kind of fundamental innovation, and the team didn't necessarily have that mindset to see it through. So we made some really fantastic bets kind of early on. The fund ended up doing pretty phenomenally well. And yeah, we invested in very technical founders, mainly privacy preserving tech as well. Back then kind of talking about ZK snarks and Starks and multi-party computation was something a lot of people weren't talking about, but it's really great kind of seeing that come more to the forefront with a lot of these new solutions. Yeah,
I think there's been a lot of folks who have actually criticized crypto because it's not private. But in fact, it's actually very public, and that's been something that people are trying to close. So you're at Decrypt Capital, and I think it's very common as well for people to start almost from a consulting perspective, right? Where you're there auditing smart contracts, you started to identify the value, then you open up your fund where you knew it was out there, you invested in it. Are you still at Decrypt Capital, and what have you done since?
Yeah, so kind of a long intro, but I'll kind of catch up. I mean, so in doing that, we realized that like, there was a conference every day, I think was like in 2018 was kind of like the narrative, and like all of them were just type fest, right? It was people trying to get you to buy tokens. And we got to the point where me and my partners didn't even want to go to these. And so we were like, we should start one for the founders we're investing in, for the builders. So ended up co-founding San Francisco Blockchain Week, which was another learning experience. We had hosted some small events at Berkeley, and we're like, how much harder could it be to go from 300 people to 3,000? It should be linear, right? But definitely not. But was pretty great. Like I really enjoyed it. Working with builders, building communities has always kind of been the thing I'm passionate about, and then kind of investing on the side. And was doing that for a couple of years, and ended up getting connected to a few of the Bybit co-founders through a mutual friend. And they had talked about this Marana fund that they were standing up, and were interested in having me kind of shift over to that to help kind of stand up the fund. That was interesting. It was definitely like a lot more resources, a lot larger scale than I'd been working with kind of previously. But really the thing that kind of like engaged me most was they talked about this BitDAO entity. And they're like, it has this $2.5 billion treasury, like Bybit's putting $2 to $5 million a day in contributions into it, which is about $1 billion a year. And the kind of North Star was they wanted to support builders. And so I started to look at it and I'm like, this is exactly what I've kind of been doing, but on a much grander scale. So I've been extremely active in the BitDAO community, drafting proposals for Game 7, which is a 500 million gaming ecosystem DAO, for EduDAO, which supports student groups like blockchain at Berkeley, blockchain at MIT, Harvard. Like there's about 8 schools in this first batch. Because for me, it was like, how do I kind of give back to this community that, kind of very much influenced my life for the better. So, real passion project kind of getting EduDAO passed. And the latest one that just passed that I helped kind of draft was ZK which is a ecosystem support fund for the ZK Sync platform. So, so kind of dual hatting between investment at Marana and then also very involved in kind of BitDAO and these autonomous entity initiatives.
I think there'd be some listeners, Jonathan, that don't know what a DAO is. Can you maybe unpack that? And then specifically around BitDAO, how do you leverage the DAO concept to do what it does?
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, the definition that everybody always starts with is it's like a decentralized, autonomous organization. But what that kind of functionally means is it's like, instead of having kind of this top-down governance of like a normal company where you have kind of like a CEO, a COO, kind of like all those C-suite executives kind of guiding, it should really be more oriented toward bottom-up. There's a lot of different structures kind of being trialed on what that looks like, but overall it's like you should have a more decentralized governance structure. You should open it up to the public and you can have it operated by Web3 native tools. And so what that means is like, you can have these tokens kind of sent around to all the people who are members of that organization. They can use those tokens to vote. And then you can also have kind of like a multi-sig or kind of like a wallet that you use to kind of send and receive funds. What that looks like in the underlying, it's still kind of like an LLC or a C Corp, or if you don't have it one, it's still a partnership. It still has like kind of that base entity. But it's the DAO kind of mechanism is really just a kind of innovation in the governance. Like, how are you making decisions? Which is really cool to kind of see, because you've seen a lot of these community-run, community-led, and a lot of different kind of structures for how things get decided.
Yeah, the one thing that I've always noticed about crypto is that it's all about community. And when you look at something like a DAO, I always thought, it really reflects American values because it's democracy in action. And the technology, like you talked about voting and governance, but the technology allows democracy and democratic governance to really work, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like, it's kind of interesting because a lot of people like to act like DAOs are like binary, like it either is or it isn't, like there's Constitution DAO, right, where it's like, I think like 10,000 people or something contributed, to spontaneously try to buy the Constitution. Like, obviously that's very decentralized. Like, I think like one person running everything, that's definitely not, a DAO, but it's like somewhere in between. I also think it depends on like the mission and the expected outcomes. And it's kind of interesting seeing like these DAOs just really speed run like all the different governance kind of models we've seen in history. And a lot of them end up being like this representative democracy, like this republic, right? With the kind of committees deciding things and kind of having the masses be able to elect and appoint them. So I mean, a lot of work to do to kind of balance that decentralized nature of things, but still be efficient. And finding which models kind of work best for that is something that's really cool to see. Awesome.
So last question about you and your background, Jonathan, then I'd love to pivot to, some advice that you can give vets as they're thinking about the transition. But, tell us about a typical day. What's a day in the life of John Allen these days?
I think that's one of the things that I like most about kind of like Web3 and crypto is like, I always tell people it's like more traditional jobs is kind of like a two-dimensional model of you. You're expected to do these roles. You're put in this like bucket, and then like that's all that you do. But like maybe you have other interests, right? Like maybe it's like not something that you just like optimize that one kind of skill set. So it's very, very interesting. And so I think like in my current role, like I mentioned, kind of 50% is to like a lot of these autonomous entities. So like Game 7, EduDAO, ZK DAO, a lot of that's like setting up the entity structure, kind of setting up the governance, kind of like hiring for those positions, like figuring out what the kind of like role of it should be, what the narrative, like it's really like, standing up kind of like the startup, right? Like figuring out how to best integrate the community and how to open that up, which is great. And then the other 50% is at Marana Ventures. And so this is, diligent projects, kind of working with our existing portfolios, kind of giving assistance for that. It's also managing the analysts and kind of other employees in the fund who assist with a lot of this deal flow. And then just in general, I mean, between like BitDAO and Marana and then WindRanger, which is kind of the partner entity that we work with a lot for kind of ecosystem development, engineering, design, marketing. There's just a lot of interviews. BitDAO started in September. Marana started a couple of months before that. And so it's just growing very quickly. So trying to kind of expand the team, like do those investments, and then build these kind of new entities with BitDAO. So it keeps things extremely exciting.
That's one of the exciting things about the space is, your latest ventures are relatively new. But if you really unpack the entire crypto industry, the Bitcoin white paper came out in 2008. Yes, Ethereum came out, white paper 2014, 2015. But almost everything that we deal with is less than 5 years old, and it's moving so fast.
Yep.
So I guess my next question is, back in 2013, you were able to learn everything about crypto, in a couple of hours a day while you're laid up in the hospital room rehabilitating. How should transitioning veterans think about getting up to speed on this industry now? How do they educate themselves? What would you recommend, John?
I mean, I think like one of the best resources, there's a couple of different ways to engage. I think like the one that's like the most kind of like passive would just be like crypto Twitter. It's kind of what we call basically like all of the people in crypto on Twitter. It's really like its own bubble. So like following a lot of the people, and I mean, you can search kind of like, top crypto kind of influencers thing and maybe start with that, but then figure out what you're interested in. You'll see kind of people who retweet, people who reply, and just kind of curate that group. It's kind of amazing like how accessible nearly everyone is in the industry. Like kind of anyone at any crypto company is pretty much on Twitter having dialogues. Sometimes it'll be like lengthy threads where they just communicate a lot of their thoughts. And so I think that's one of the best places to kind of passively get that context. But there's only so much depth there, right? Because people kind of externalize what they want, and that might not necessarily be what they think, right? Or what's kind of long-term minded. So, I mean, you have to be kind of aware of the bias and like why people are posting things there. Like Reddit cryptocurrency and Bitcoin used to be good, but now I don't really recommend it. There's some kind of like Telegram groups that are okay to join, but just in general, I think it's like finding a community of people that you can like engage with, be this kind of like friends or like other kind of individuals. And I think in general right now, it's like most of those communities are on Discord. So like find a project you're passionate about, find something that's interesting, or find like an NFT project or an artist, and almost all of them has these Discords. And if you just participate and ask questions, I mean, a lot of these people are just passionate about it and want to help you, but then also they're probably invested, or they're like part of the project, right? And so they have like a lot of incentive to help you understand and to get you to be passionate. So I think like that's probably the best kind of one if you want to actually spend time, is like hop into a Discord of something you find interesting and just start asking questions, start engaging, start kind of like making friends and having those conversations. Because like that direct way is much easier to learn than trying to scrape the entire like crypto Twitter and kind of net to like find kind of tidbits and piece it together, right? So that's what I recommend. Just jump in somewhere, and then hopefully you kind of get enough context there to be able to kind of hop around to other spaces.
That's awesome advice. And clearly, John, you're a super technical guy. Do you need to be a computer scientist or a programmer or a coder to have a successful career in crypto?
I don't think so. I think it's like engineers are hard to find, like developers are hard to find, but equally as difficult are good community managers. You're starting up all of these, like especially like in the DAO space, and for a lot of these projects, like getting a passionate community and getting them engaged, like it's very hard. And so it's like, marketing, community managing, like design, UI, UX, like developing, like pretty much every position you can think of is hiring. So I think like whatever your skill set or whatever your passion is, it's pretty easy to find that role in a lot of these projects or a lot of these DAOs, especially that are spinning up.
So what excites you most about the future of the space across Web3? What are there verticals that you're particularly interested in? I know you're a major DAO player. But what gets you excited about this space?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like three verticals. I mean, obviously I'm interested in a lot of things, but I think there's like three primary ones. I think like obviously DAO tools, just because it's such a like nascent space. Like there's just so much that's left to do. Like just how do you communicate with people? How do you get people spun up on what the context of the Discord, what the DAO is, what they're doing? Like how do you incentivize voting? How do you make voting easier? Like how do you kind of reduce this friction of having to use like Telegram and Discord and Discourse and Snapshot, and like stack all these tools? Like, how do you reduce that friction? How do you have like better kind of governance models? So, and it was a ton there. I think that's like obviously directly aligned with a lot of stuff I'm working on as well. I think GameFi, a lot of this kind of like play to earn stuff popped up. It was like very noisy, and you've seen a lot of kind of just very kind of people who are trying to quickly kind of flip like existing games, put a token into it, and very similar to like 2017. There's a lot of similarity there. But in general, I think that gaming is just such a massive industry. I think especially with COVID, more and more people are, into gaming or looking for kind of like hobbies that are, digital in nature. And so I think we've seen kind of, the progression of gaming from, kind of like free to play, pay to win, and now like, kind of pay to earn or some kind of economic mechanism within it. So I think that there's just a ton of potential to unlock there. There's a lot of hurdles as well, because a lot of people think, hey, crypto is just generally a scam and write it off. And then the other half are like, hey, gaming is a scam and they're just trying to extract value out of me by making me pay for downloadable content and pay to play. So like you have the intersection of two industries that need to work on trust, which is kind of ironic because like blockchain, gave this primitive of trust, but anyway, kind of a tangent. So I think GameFi, there's like a lot there. There's a ton of money. There's a ton of interest. There's a ton of very talented people from traditional gaming as well as blockchain working on some cool stuff there. And I think last but definitely not least is just zero knowledge proofs. I think there's so much application there, and I think kind of the minority application for them is privacy. I think like a lot of stuff like snarks and kind of like starks, like what they're using, kind of like the S in snark stands for succinct. And so you're able to create this kind of succinct proof. And so people are using it for scalability. They're using it for kind of like that concise property to kind of like kind of manage data in a more kind of maintainable way, because blockchains make data very expensive to host. So anything that can make that smaller has a lot of kind of benefits to this.
Very cool. And I think a lot of these verticals are interconnected as well, right? When you have a game, it's a community, it's kind of a DAO. And I guess you'd want some privacy within that community as well at times. So what advice would you have for a veteran or spouse who's trying to break into the space?
It's easy to get overwhelmed. There's like a lot going on, but it's like I think you kind of like dip a toe in the water and find a group that you align with. I think that's the biggest challenge, like making that first step. And so like I mentioned, like there's a lot of communities that are incentivized to kind of like educate you and kind of like help you kind of get spun up. So I'd be a bit selective what that first one is, because it's kind of interesting. I think like where people tend to get into crypto, like there can be a bit of bias. Like crypto is very tribal because people are making money, and trying to have you invest. And so like there's some bias there, right? So just kind of be aware of the context of kind of the stuff that you're doing. But in general, I think the majority of people I've interacted with have just been super passionate, like really excited, just like want to kind of share this with people. It tends to be like, when you're in crypto, you're always that person who can only talk about crypto with your friends. And so I think just like find that group, find people that you get along with, and just like pick their brain. And just like, I think that's a good foundation, and then you can build from there.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. Any industry you're trying to break into, it's about people and it's about network. The thing about crypto that I've noticed, though, is that it's much easier to form that network and that community by referencing some of the tools that you spoke about, right? Like the Discords, even the Twitters. So I totally agree with you. So last question, John, any last thoughts and how can people connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best way is on Twitter. It's just Jonathan T. Allen 1. It's a very common name, so didn't get a kind of my pick for handles, but that's probably the best way to connect. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. What an incredible story. Everything from your service through your transition. And what a great talk today. And I also wanted to thank our sponsor, Luca. These guys go above and beyond to support us as we film these podcasts. We can't thank them enough. If anyone's interested in learning more about VIDA, please connect with us on LinkedIn or Twitter. If you have any ideas of other people that we should bring on to this show, please reach out to me on Twitter as well, PerkinsCR97. And thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.